She threw my plate on the floor right there in front of everyone. Not by accident, not in a stumble or a spill, but with intention, like I was some stain she wanted to scrub out of her life. The food scattered, the plate shattered, and she looked me straight in the eye and hissed, "Witch, you should have never come." I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I looked at my son, waiting, just for a flicker of something in his eyes, some sign that I mattered. But he stayed quiet. He didn't reach for me. He didn't speak. He just lowered his head like my shame was something he agreed with. So I picked up my purse, I straightened my back, and I walked out of that restaurant, like I wasn't the one bleeding on the inside. And while they thought that dinner was the end of me, what came Monday morning reminded them that even the quiet ones know how to speak, especially when they've been silent too long. Thank you for sitting with me tonight. I don't take your time lightly, and I don't share this because it's easy. It's not. This one still stings when I speak it out loud, and I've had to carry it for longer than I should have. But if you're here, if you've ever felt unwelcome at a table you once paid to set, or looked into the face of someone you loved and saw only distance where there used to be warmth, then maybe you'll understand why I'm telling this. I wonder where you're watching from, what room you're sitting in, what silence you've had to live with. I don't know your name, but I know that kind of ache. And I hope while I tell this, you feel a little less alone in whatever it is you've had to carry too. If someone made you feel small for just showing up, or acted like your presence was a burden, I want you to know, your story matters. And you're not the only one who's been through something heavy that no one else saw. So stay with me. Let me tell you what happened. Let me show you how I carried it, and what I did when I decided I was done being quiet. I wasn't born bitter, and I didn't grow old expecting anyone to owe me. I raised my son with everything I had, not because I wanted anything in return, but because that's what love meant to me. It meant making sure he never went to bed hungry, even if it meant I did. It meant walking home in the rain because I needed to save that last bit of gas for the school run in the morning. I worked at the diner by day and cleaned offices by night, and somehow, in between the shifts and the bills, I managed to keep us afloat. There was no applause for that. Just tired feet, worn hands, and the quiet joy of hearing his laughter echo down our little hallway. When he grew up and met Kelsey, I tried my best to smile. She was the kind of woman who spoke like she'd already decided who you were before you introduced yourself. Pretty, yes. Polished, educated, dressed sharp enough to cut through a room. But behind that smile was something colder than any winter I've ever known. I remember the first time she came to dinner. She barely touched her food, barely looked me in the eye. But my son? He was smitten. So I swallowed the uneasy feeling and told myself I was just overthinking it. I wanted to believe in their happiness, even if I couldn't feel welcomed in it. When they got engaged, I offered what I could. I cashed out a small certificate I'd been saving for years, and it covered most of their down payment. I gave them the family car, the one my late husband and I bought together. I set up a small trust, not large, but enough to make sure the little ones they'd have one day would never need to worry about school books or shoes. I didn't do it to be remembered. I did it because I thought that's what family did. You give, and even if you're not asked, you still show up. I didn't want praise or a plaque or a corner named after me. I just wanted to be seen, not as the tired woman who raised a man, but as the woman who never once stopped loving him, even when the calls got fewer, the visits shorter, and the silence thicker. All I ever hoped for was a little warmth in return, a plate at the table, a thank you that felt like it meant something. Instead, I was slowly written out of a life I helped build. And I didn't even realize it until that night, when my name wasn't even whispered with respect, but thrown down like the plate she shattered beneath her feet. It had been months since I heard his voice on the other end of the line. So when he called that Thursday afternoon, I thought maybe something was wrong. But he sounded calm, almost polite, like he'd been coached through the words. He said they were going out to eat Sunday evening and thought it might be nice if I joined. He said Kelsey had mentioned wanting to reconnect, said it would be a good time for all of us to sit together, talk, and catch up. I was surprised, of course, but a part of me, maybe the part that still holds on even when it shouldn't, felt hopeful. I thought maybe this was the beginning of something healing. Maybe she was finally letting go of whatever it was she held against me. I laid out my best dress that night, the one with the soft green sleeves that my husband used to say brought out my smile. I ironed it twice. Saturday, I walked down to the little shop near the library and bought a stuffed rabbit with floppy ears and a ribbon around its neck. I wrapped it in brown paper, tied it up with twine, and wrote the child's name in my neatest cursive. I imagined her opening it, smiling, maybe even saying thank you. The smallest things carry the biggest hopes sometimes. Sunday came, and I sat by the window longer than I should have, rechecking the clock, reapplying lipstick, adjusting my scarf, even when it didn't need fixing. When the taxi pulled up, I felt something soft flutter in my chest. But the moment I stepped into that restaurant, it stopped. The lighting was warm, the chatter lively, but none of it touched me. My eyes went straight to their table, already seated, already halfway through a bottle of wine. Kelsey looked up once, then looked past me, like I was a stranger interrupting her night. No smile. Not even the bare politeness people give a waiter. Her friends were there too, which I hadn't been told. One of them glanced me over, elbowed the woman next to her, and they shared a smile I wasn't meant to see. The server showed me to my seat, not beside them, but at the far corner of the table, as if they'd added an extra chair as an afterthought. I placed the little gift down gently on the table, but no one looked at it. No one asked what it was. They went on talking like I hadn't even arrived, and I sat there pretending I didn't feel the weight of every cold shoulder pressing against me like bricks. I kept my smile soft, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I looked at the menu even though I already knew what I'd order. I nodded along as if I was listening, even though no one spoke to me. I tried to tell myself it was just awkwardness, that maybe this was her way of trying, even if it didn't look like much. But deep down, I knew better. You can feel when you're not wanted. You don't need words. It's in the way people don't look at you. It's in the laughter that starts only after you stop speaking. It's in the way someone can talk over you without ever acknowledging that you're sitting right there. That night hadn't even truly started, and already I could feel something cracking in me that had been bending for far too long. The conversation that night was full of smiles that didn't reach anyone's eyes. Kelsey led it all, talking fast and loud as though trying to drown out the quiet between us. Her voice carried across the table like a performance, each word carefully chosen, sharp enough to sting but soft enough to pass as casual. At first it was little things, small comments disguised as humor. She leaned across to her friend and said, "That perfume reminds me of my grandmother. So vintage." Then she looked my way, eyes narrowed just enough to let me know it wasn't meant kindly. I smiled, polite, as if I hadn't heard. But I had. Every word. A little while later, after some laughter and wine, she said, "I don't know how people do it, living alone day after day. I'd go mad. Just so quiet." Her friends nodded. My son said nothing. I stared down at my hands. I've had years alone. Some nights are heavy, yes, but I've never once mistaken solitude for sadness. There's a peace in your own company, unless you're made to feel like it's punishment. I took a sip of water, steadying myself. Still, I said nothing. She kept going. "The worst always comes dressed as a joke." "You know," she said, flicking her napkin on her lap, "some people just don't know when to bow out gracefully. Like they've played their part and it's time to exit the stage, but they just keep showing up." I felt that one. Sharp and deliberate. Her friend laughed. My son glanced at his watch. Not once did he look at me. Not once did he say her name or ask her to stop. I sat there quietly, tasting every insult like ash on my tongue. My hands stayed in my lap. I told myself to hold on just a little longer, to get through dinner and go home. I reached for my glass, trying to steady the ache swelling in my chest. But that's when it happened. The server placed my plate gently in front of me, a small portion of salmon and steamed vegetables. I thanked him softly, even smiled. Before I could lift my fork, Kelsey leaned in with a smirk, and with one sudden motion, grabbed the plate and slammed it down onto the floor. The sound was deafening. The plate shattered, pieces flying across the hardwood, food splattered across my shoes. Her voice followed, full of venom and fire. "You're nothing but a bitter old witch." You should have never come." The room froze. Conversation stopped. A fork clattered onto a plate across the room. Someone at another table gasped. But my son, he stayed silent. He stared at his own meal like he hadn't just watched his mother be torn apart in public. He didn't look up. He didn't speak. He didn't even flinch. And in that moment I knew. Not just about her, no, that truth had been knocking for years, but about him. That silence hurt more than the words. Because silence in a moment like that isn't peace. It's agreement. It's a choice. And he chose not to see me. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for help or explanation. I simply reached down, picked up my purse, brushed the crumbs and shame from my skirt, and stood. I walked out of that restaurant with my head high, even if something inside me felt shattered like the plate she'd thrown. I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me worth seeing. That night, I came home and sat in the kitchen without turning on the light. The house was still, the kind of quiet that presses on your shoulders, not in comfort, but in weight. I slipped off my shoes and placed my purse on the table, the same table where I had once cut up apples for school lunches, folded laundry while humming to the radio, helped with homework under a flickering bulb. It felt like another life now, like something I had borrowed and was asked to return. I boiled water for tea, but when it was ready, I didn't drink it. I just watched the steam rise and vanish. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I didn't know where to begin. I kept going over the moment in my head, every cruel word, every second of silence that followed it. I wondered if anyone at that table felt even a flicker of shame. I wondered if my son, wherever he was that night, had even thought about me at all. Then, while I was still sitting there in the dimness, I heard my phone buzz, just one small vibration against the wood. I almost didn't check it. But something in me reached for it. The screen lit up with a single message. It read, "Grandma, I saw what she did. I'm so sorry." For a moment I just stared at the words. My hand stopped trembling. My breath caught. The message was from Lily, my granddaughter, the one who always gave quiet hugs and asked questions no one else bothered to. I hadn't known she was there that night. I hadn't seen her, but she had seen me. Another message came. "That wasn't okay." Dad looked ashamed, but he still did nothing. I recorded it. "You didn't deserve that." I read those words over and over, like a balm on a burn that wouldn't stop aching. She had seen it all. The words, the plate, the silence, and she hadn't looked away. She hadn't pretended it didn't happen. In that moment, her small act became something much larger. A witness. A voice. A spark in the dark. I sat there, phone still glowing in my palm, and I felt something stir in me that hadn't moved in a long time. Not anger, not revenge, just the quiet realization that maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought, and maybe silence didn't have to be the last word. Something had shifted, deep and certain. I didn't know yet what I would do next, but I knew now I would not let that night define me. I had been humiliated, yes, but I had also been seen. And that made all the difference. I didn't sleep much that night. The house stayed quiet, but my thoughts didn't. I sat by the window as the sky turned from black to a dull gray, and the kettle whistled again, though I hadn't asked it to. That text from Lily kept echoing in my mind, not just for what it said, but for what it meant. Someone had seen me, really seen me. And someone had known that what happened wasn't just mean or embarrassing, it was wrong. I'd spent so long brushing things aside, telling myself it wasn't worth the trouble, that keeping peace was more important than being right. But peace shouldn't cost your dignity. And that night, mine had been scraped across the floor like broken glass, and no one had bent down to pick it up. Just after the sun rose, I walked into the back room, the one with the cabinet no one else ever touches. I opened the drawer where I keep the papers no one ever asks about, and I laid them out on the table one by one. The trust, signed and notarized, with my name beside theirs. The deed to the condo with the ink still crisp and the date circled in red. The car title which I'd paid off in full, then handed over with a smile and a set of keys. My will, sealed in an envelope, untouched since the day I'd written it by hand. I stood over those papers and thought about all the years they represented. The jobs I worked, the nights I went without, the things I gave so freely because love, to me, always meant giving more than I had. I didn't do it for gratitude, and I didn't need to be honored. But love, real love, shouldn't feel like this. It It shouldn't feel like being erased. It shouldn't feel like being tolerated. So I picked up the phone, dialed the number I hadn't used in years, and waited as it rang. When Mr. Harrison answered, his voice was the same as always, steady, warm, no judgment. He asked how I'd been. I told him I was ready. He didn't need to ask what for. I think he could hear it in my voice. I said, "No more looking the other way." He paused, then said, "All right, let's make it clear then." And just like that, the wind shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was a quiet kind of strength, the kind that builds when you've spent years being small so someone else could feel tall. That morning, I chose to stop shrinking. I chose to remind them that while they were throwing plates and insults, I still held something far heavier. Not revenge. Just the truth. And that truth had paperwork behind it. Monday came with the kind of calm that doesn't announce itself, the kind that settles in your bones before the day has a chance to stretch its legs. I didn't rush. I made my tea. I fed the birds. I folded the towel I'd left on the rack the night before. Across town, as I imagined it, things were still quiet. The kind of quiet people enjoy when they believe they've won something. I pictured her standing in that sleek kitchen, hair still wrapped in a towel, sipping coffee with that same smirk she wore when she called me a witch in front of strangers. Maybe she was replaying it in her mind, proud of the scene she'd caused, proud of how small she'd made me look in front of people who would forget my name by morning. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have guessed, was that while she was setting the table for her own comfort, I was preparing something too. Not loud, not messy. Just facts written in ink, signed, sealed, and sent. That morning, as the sun reached the edge of their balcony, a knock came at the door. The kind of knock that doesn't wait long. The kind that comes with a clipboard, a signature line, and a deadline. She answered in her robe, probably thinking it was another delivery or a neighbor or something that had to do with her. She looked down and saw the envelope. Thick, official. The seal alone enough to freeze her posture. She signed without thinking. People like her always do. They think paperwork is just paper until they read what's inside. And when she did, I imagine the smirk slipped, just a little. Maybe she read the first line twice to make sure she understood it. Maybe she called out his name from across the room, holding the pages like they were burning her fingers. Because what she held wasn't just a letter, it was a boundary, a wall finally drawn. It read, "As of this date, all privileges and access to the following assets are revoked." Then line by line, it spelled out what that meant. The condo she decorated with throw pillows and pretended to own? Legally, it was mine. The deed never left my name. The car she drove past me in without waving? Purchased with my money, titled in full under me. The trust they dipped into when the bills piled up or the vacations called, frozen until further review. No raised voices, no grand scene. Just truth on paper. That dinner had been her show, a performance for her circle, a moment to strip me down and prove something. But this was mine. Not revenge, just a quiet reckoning. The kind that doesn't break windows but opens eyes. And I hoped, as she stood there holding those pages, that for once she saw me. Not as someone old or small or in the way, but as the one who had kept the ground steady beneath their feet far longer than they ever cared to notice. After the letter was delivered and the silence settled, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt still, like something inside me had finally stopped spinning. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't expect one. I didn't look at the phone or wonder if anyone would call. I just let it all be quiet. And in that quiet, I started to do something I hadn't done in a long while. I started tending to myself. Not because I needed to prove a point, not because I needed to heal faster, but because I realized I'd been putting myself last for far too long. The first thing I did was change the locks on my cabin. Not because I was afraid, but because I was done leaving the door open for people who walked in, only to take. I brought in new keys, had them cut the way I wanted, and hung them on the hook beside the fridge. That simple act made the air feel different, lighter. Then I moved my old rocking chair back out to the front porch, the one I'd tucked away when the house felt too quiet. I wiped it down, set it under the oak tree, and let the breeze move through me while I sat with no need to be anywhere else. I baked peach cobbler that Thursday afternoon. The kind I used to make when he was little. But this time, I didn't wrap it up for someone else. I didn't wait for visitors. I didn't set out extra plates. I made it for me. I cut the peaches slow, let the sugar soak in, and when the scent filled the whole kitchen, I smiled. Not because someone else would be impressed, but because I was finally feeding myself with something that wasn't just food. It was peace. Lily started coming by more often, not out of pity. Not because anyone asked her to. She just showed up. She'd bring over library books, tuck flowers into a mason jar for my table, and sit with me while we talked about everything but that night. She didn't ask for explanations. She didn't need them. She just loved me without condition, and that was more than enough. One morning, we were sitting outside and I laughed, really laughed. It surprised me, the sound of it, the way it came from deep in my chest, like something waking up that had been sleeping for years. She looked over and smiled, and I said, almost in disbelief, I haven't heard that in a long time. And it was true. For the first time in years, I heard laughter in my house again. And it was mine. Not borrowed, not forced, not waiting for permission. Just mine. And it sounded like freedom. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the breeze moves slow and the world doesn't ask much of you. I had just finished watering the garden, wiped my hands on the side of my dress, and was setting a cup of tea down on the table when I saw the shadow cross the gravel. At first, I thought it might be the postman or Lily coming early, but when I looked up, it was him. Standing there at the edge of the steps, looking older than I remembered, holding a plastic bag in both hands, like he wasn't sure if he should walk closer or turn around and leave. He didn't speak at first, just stood there with his head bowed and his shoes scraping the earth. Then finally, with a voice smaller than I ever thought I'd hear from him, he said, I didn't stop her. I should have. I'm sorry. I didn't answer. I didn't rush to ease his shame. I didn't cry or speak his name or ask where he'd been these past weeks. I just looked at him, really looked at him. And then I nodded slowly toward the empty chair across from me. It creaked softly in the wind, as if it had been waiting. You're welcome to sit, I said gently, but not to explain. He nodded, quiet, and made his way up the steps. He sat down carefully, like he was stepping into a place he no longer owned. The bag rustled as he set it on the table. Inside were a few apples, a jar of honey, and a loaf of bread that still held the warmth of the bakery. Nothing fancy, nothing rehearsed, just a small offering from a man who knew he'd let something slip through his fingers. We didn't talk about the restaurant. We didn't talk about the silence or the plate or the letter. There was no speech, no performance, just the sound of birds somewhere in the trees, and two people sitting side by side with everything and nothing between them. Redemption isn't a grand moment. It's not loud. It's not fixed with one visit or a basket of bread. It's slow. It's quiet. It takes time. And it isn't owed. It's earned. That day, I didn't forgive him fully. I didn't forget what it felt like to stand alone with my dignity scattered across the floor. But I let him sit. I let him stay. And that was a start, not because I had to, but because some doors don't need to be slammed shut. They just need to be opened carefully, one slow inch at a time. He sat beside me for a long while that afternoon, but it was the silence that did most of the talking. And somehow, that was enough. Not to fix everything, not to erase what had been done, but enough to make space for something honest. I didn't offer comfort, and he didn't ask for it. He sat with the weight of his choices, and I sat with the strength it took to stand up when I was expected to stay small. And in that stillness, I realized something I wish I'd known much earlier. There is no shame in walking away from a table where love no longer lives. If they ever made you feel like your presence was unwanted, like you were something they had to tolerate instead of treasure, don't stay where you aren't seen. Don't shrink yourself to make someone else more comfortable. Don't keep showing up in rooms where your name is only spoken with resentment. If they humiliate you in public, strip you of dignity in front of others, remind them that you still carry quiet power. The kind that doesn't beg or break, but chooses peace over performance. That night, they served humiliation. They served it with wine, with smirks, with silence. But what they didn't know is that I don't need an audience to find my strength. I don't need applause to do what's right. And while they served shame with a smile, I served consequences at dawn. with a calm heart, steady hands, and the law in my corner. So, if you're listening, and you've been made to feel like your worth has to be proven over and over, hear me now. You don't need to explain yourself to anyone who refuses to see you. You don't need to wait for someone to stand up for you. Sometimes standing alone is the bravest thing you'll ever do. And it's enough. It's more than enough. Have you ever poured your heart into someone, given them your time, your strength, your sacrifice, and still found yourself standing outside the door you helped build? Have you ever looked into the face of someone you once rocked to sleep and realized they don't see you anymore, not as a mother, not even as a human being? Have you ever sat in silence while others laughed at your pain and the person you needed to defend you looked away? If you've ever walked away from a moment that tried to crush you, if you've ever been made to feel small in a room where you once felt safe, I want to hear your story. Not because you need permission to speak it, but because you deserve to be heard. I read every story you share, every word, every ache wrapped in honesty, and I carry them with me like threads stitched into my own. So tell me, have you been betrayed by the ones you gave everything to? Did your silence speak louder than their cruelty? Write it down in the comments below. You never know who might need your truth to feel less alone in their own. I never told this story to make anyone feel sorry for me. I told it because somewhere out there, someone's carrying the same kind of silence I did. The kind that sits heavy on your chest when you smile through disrespect, when you offer love and get ignored, when you stand quietly in a room that was built with your hands, but now feels like a stranger's house. I don't live in that silence anymore. I chose to leave it behind, not for revenge, not out of bitterness, but because I knew I deserved better. And if you've ever felt the same, if you've ever had to get up from a table where all they served you was shame, then I hope you know you're not the only one. I leave now, not for them, but for anyone who's ever walked away from a place that treated them like a shadow. I leave for anyone who gave everything and was still asked to give more. And I stay here, in this space, for you. So subscribe if you're still healing. Stay if you're still learning how to stand tall again. And if this story touched something quiet inside you, then know this light, it's for you. Thank you for watching.